A train door slides open. Cold air rushes in. No one inside knows where they are. They only know the shouting, the dogs, the uniforms, the smoke in the distance. Within minutes, families will be separated. Some will be sent to work. Others will walk toward buildings they will never leave. This is not a scene from a movie. This happened. During the Second World War, entire governments turned cruelty into policy, murder into paperwork, death into routine, and millions of ordinary people were caught inside systems designed to erase them. Today, we are walking through some of the worst war crimes of the war, not to shock you, but to understand how quickly humanity can collapse when hate is organized. And as you listen, remember something uncomfortable. Every single event you're about to hear was carried out by people who went home afterward, ate dinner, and slept. If you value learning the history most people try to look away from, subscribe now, because the next minutes are going to be hard to forget. Let's begin. Nazi death camps. Picture Europe in the early 1940s. Trains moved day and night across the continent. Inside them are Jews, Roma, political prisoners, disabled people, Soviet POWs, and anyone the regime decided should disappear. They are told they are being relocated, given numbers, luggage tags, instructions. At places like Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor and Belzec, the system is terrifyingly efficient. Doctors stand on the platform. A quick glance. Left or right. Work or immediate death. Gas chambers disguised as showers. Guards telling people to hang their clothes neatly so they can find them later. Doors lock. Engines roar. Poison fills the air. Outside smoke rises constantly. Ash falls like grey snow on nearby towns. By the time the camps are liberated, 6 million Jews are dead. Millions more civilians and prisoners alongside them. The scale is almost impossible to hold in your mind, but what makes it worse is this. It was organised, scheduled, recorded. If a nation can industrialise death once, could it ever happen again? Hold that thought, because elsewhere another empire was conducting horror of its own. Unit 731, Northern China, a complex surrounded by walls and secrecy. Inside, doctors and scientists in clean uniforms prepare experiments, but their subjects are not volunteers. They are prisoners of war, civilians, children. They are infected with plague, cholera, anthrax. Some are frozen outside until their limbs turn black, so doctors can study frostbite. Others are cut open while still alive, organs removed without anesthesia, because the researchers want to see the disease progress in real time. Bombs filled with bacteria are tested on villages. Epidemics follow. Entire communities die. After the war, many of the men responsible are never tried. In exchange for their research, they are given immunity. Knowledge traded for justice. Imagine surviving that and watching the world move on. If history like this matters to you, subscribe, because very few people talk about it honestly. But we are not finished. Not even close. The Rape of Nanjing. December 1937. Chinese soldiers retreat. Civilians are left behind. Japanese troops enter the city. What follows lasts 6 weeks. Mass executions. Bodies in the river. Houses burned. Women assaulted in numbers so large that witnesses later struggle to speak. Some victims are killed afterward. Others are left alive. Foreign diplomats create safety zones, but even those are not always respected. Photographs survive. Diaries survive. Testimony survives. When the war ends, trials are held. Yet debates and denials continue for decades. Memory becomes another battlefield. But if remembering is uncomfortable, what does forgetting cost? And while cities burned in Asia, brutality unfolded across Europe's eastern front. The massacre at Babi Yar, a ravine outside Kiev. People are ordered to gather with their belongings. They think they are being relocated. Instead, they are marched to the edge, forced to undress. Machine guns wait. Over 2 days, more than 30,000 Jews are shot and fall into the ravine, layer upon layer of bodies. Later, prisoners are forced to dig them up and burn them to erase the evidence. But the land remembers. Even when regimes change, even when silence falls, the ground still knows. How does a society return to normal after something like that? Can it? Now shift scenes again, because war crimes were not limited to civilians. Even surrender did not guarantee safety. The Bataan Death March, the Philippines. Thousands of American and Filipino prisoners are forced to walk for days in brutal heat. Little water, almost no food. If someone falls, they are beaten, sometimes executed on the spot. Civilians who try to help are punished too. By the end, thousands are dead before they ever reach the camps. Survivors carry the memory for the rest of their lives. Years later at trials, guards claim they were following orders. A phrase repeated again and again across history. Following orders. But at what point does a person decide an order is too far? We like to believe we would know, would we? Because the war kept producing moments where morality collapsed. Malmedy, Belgium. American prisoners are gathered in a snowy field after surrendering. German troops open fire. Some try to run. They are hunted down. When news spreads, fury spreads with it. The desire for revenge grows, and war becomes even more brutal. One crime feeding another, hatred multiplying itself. If violence creates more violence, how do you ever stop it? This question haunted the world when the war finally ended. Trials began. Evidence piled high. Films shown in courtrooms. Survivors pointing at the men who had once held their lives in their hands. Some were executed. Some imprisoned. Some escaped. Justice, imperfect and incomplete, tried to rebuild a moral line. But even after sentences were passed, the damage remained. Cities destroyed, families erased, trauma passed down through generations. And here is the hardest truth. The people who built these systems were not monsters from another planet. They were human. Which means the potential always exists again. The uniforms change, the flags change, the language changes, but the warning stays the same. When propaganda dehumanizes, when fear is weaponized, when cruelty becomes normalized, history starts to repeat. The Second World War ended in 1945, but its lessons are still being tested right now, somewhere. So the real question is not how those people became capable of these crimes. It's whether we are paying enough attention to make sure we never do. Because the moment we stop remembering, we start risking it. And history has shown us exactly where that can lead. The Katyn massacre, a forest in the Soviet Union, spring 1940. Trucks arrive one by one. Inside are Polish officers, intellectuals, professors, doctors, people seen not just as prisoners but as the future leadership of a nation. Their hands are tied. They are led to the edge of mass graves that have already been dug. One shot to the back of the head. Efficient. Quiet. Thousands are killed this way. For years, blame is pushed elsewhere. Truth becomes political. Families wait for answers that never come. Decades later, documents surface. Confessions emerge. But by then, generations have grown up with absence instead of fathers. Imagine not only losing someone, but being told a lie about how it happened. How heavy would that silence feel? Because truth delayed is another form of violence. And while forests were swallowing secrets, brutality unfolded in villages across Eastern Europe. Oradour-sur-Glane, France, summer 1944. Church bells ring. People are preparing for ordinary life. Then soldiers surround the town. Men are separated from women and children. Gunfire erupts in barns where men have been locked inside. Explosives follow. In the church, women and children are trapped. Flames spread. Smoke fills the air. By evening, the village is almost completely gone. When the war ends, the ruins are left untouched. Not rebuilt, not erased. A frozen warning in stone. Walk through it today and you can still see sewing machines, bicycles, burned cars. Daily life interrupted forever. What would it feel like to live beside a ghost town that never healed? And what happens to the people who survive when memory itself becomes a monument? If stories like this matter, subscribe, because forgetting is easier than understanding and far more dangerous. But we continue, because cruelty was not confined to Europe. The Manila Massacre, Philippines, 1945. As Allied forces close in, desperation grows. Civilians hide in homes, hospitals, churches. They hope the fighting will pass around them. It doesn't. Soldiers move street by street, grenades thrown into rooms, families lined against walls, buildings set on fire with people still inside. The city that once carried music and markets becomes smoke and rubble. When liberation finally comes, over 100,000 civilians are dead. A capital city transformed into a graveyard. Survivors wander through ruins, searching for names, faces, anything familiar. But war has a way of removing identity, turning people into numbers. How do you rebuild trust in the world after it collapses around you like that? How do you ever feel safe again? And yet, there were other crimes that unfolded far from the front lines, hidden behind barbed wire, the internment of civilians. Across multiple countries during the war, fear turns neighbours into suspects. Families are forced from homes, businesses abandoned, lives packed into suitcases. In the United States, Japanese American citizens are relocated to camps. Many have never even visited Japan. They lose property, livelihoods, time they will never get back. Guards watch from towers. Children grow up behind fences, wondering what crime they committed by being born. Years later, governments apologize. Compensation is offered. But can you repay lost dignity? Can you return stolen years? The question lingers. Security versus freedom. Protection versus prejudice. Where is the line and who decides when it moves? Because in war, fear can become its own weapon. And sometimes that weapon is turned inward. Still, perhaps one of the darkest chapters involved those who were supposed to be treated with mercy. Prisoners. The treatment of Soviet POWs. Captured soldiers are marched into camps with little shelter, little food, almost no medical care. Winter comes, starvation spreads, disease follows. Millions die not in battle, but in captivity. Some gods see them as less than human, as disposable. A belief repeated often enough that it becomes policy. When liberation comes, survivors are skeletal, barely able to stand, proof of how quickly cruelty becomes routine when empathy is stripped away. What would it take for someone to look at another person and see nothing worth saving? And if it happened once under certain conditions, could it happen again? History refuses to whisper. It shouts, but only if we are willing to listen. When the war finally ended, courtrooms tried to make sense of the wreckage. Judges asked how ordinary people became participants in extraordinary evil. Some defendants blamed ideology, some blamed fear, some blamed orders. But survivors spoke too. and their voices cut through excuses. They described smells, sounds, final words, details that refused to fade. The trials didn't undo the past, but they drew a line. They said, even in war there are limits. Even in chaos there must be rules, because without them humanity disappears. Yet the uncomfortable part remains. The potential never left us. It waits in moments of crisis, in leaders who promise easy answers, in crowds willing to look away. That is why remembering matters. Not to relive horror, but to recognize warning signs, to notice when language becomes cruel, when rights become conditional, when people are described as problems instead of human beings. Those are the first steps, and history shows exactly where those steps can lead. If learning this helps you see the present more clearly, subscribe, because understanding the past might be the only defense we have for the future.